will begin Part C with the first talk. Questions 40 through 42. Listen to a talk given by a history professor.
The cattle ranching industry started in the western United States in the late 1800s. As the industry developed, so did the horse riding contests that we call rodeos. Rodeos weren't always the big entertainment shows that we see nowadays. The first ones were small contests started as a form of competition among people historically referred to as cowboys, although they did include both men and women. One duty of the cowboys was to guide herds of cattle from the grassy ranges into towns along the railroad lines where the cows were loaded onto trains. The cowboys would gather near these cow towns to compete for the unofficial title of best horse rider. They would demonstrate the riding skills they had learned as a matter of survival. And the audience was composed mainly of other cowboys who watched the competitors critically, since they knew what the events were all about. Rodeo contests took a different turn in the 1890s, when organizers began to hold cowboy sports during yearly agricultural fairs. What was different was the audience. It consisted mostly of people who were unfamiliar with life on the range. They were amazed by the skill of the riders and the intelligence of the horses. The rodeos at agricultural fairs became so popular that ranchers and business people began to organize rodeos as independent events, separate from fairs. The organizers built large arenas and earned money by requiring spectators to pay for admission. One of the most notable rodeos of this type is still held annually in Wyoming. It's called Frontier Days. While Frontier Days is not the first independent rodeo, it is the oldest annual show, taking place each year since 1897.
Number 40. What is the talk mainly about? Number 41. What can be inferred about the earliest rodeos? Number 42. What is significant about Frontier Days? Questions 43 through 46. Listen to part of a talk in a biology class.
We've been looking at fear from a biological perspective, and someone asked whether the tendency to be fearful is genetic. Well, some studies done with mice indicate that mammals do inherit fearfulness to some degree. In one study, for instance, a group of mice was placed in a brightly lit open box with no hiding places. Some of the mice wandered around the box and didn't appear to be bothered about being so exposed, but other mice didn't move. They stayed up against one wall, which indicated that they were afraid. Well, when fearful mice, or you might say anxious mice, like the ones who stayed in one place, when mice like these were bred with one another repeatedly, after about 12 or so generations, then all of the offspring showed similar signs of fearfulness. And even when a newborn mouse from this generation was raised by a mother and with other mice who were not fearful, that mouse still tended to be fearful as an adult. Now, why is this? Well, it's thought that specific genes in an animal's body have an influence on anxious behavior. These are genes that are associated with particular nerve cell receptors in the brain, and the degree of overall fearfulness in a mammal seems to depend in large part on the presence or absence of these nerve cell receptors. And this appears to apply to humans as well, by the way. But while a tendency towards anxiety and fear may well be an inherited trait, the specific form that the fear takes has more to do with an individual's environment. So a particular fear, like the fear of snakes or the fear of spiders, say, is not genetic, but the overall tendency to have fearful responses is.
Number 43. What is the talk mainly about? Number 44. How did some of the mice in the study demonstrate that they were afraid? According to the professor, what contributes to a mammal's tendency to be fearful? Number 46. Why does the professor mention snakes and spiders? Questions 47 through 50. Listen to part of the talk in class.
One type of natural spring geographers are interested in is artesian springs. Hiking through the woods, some of you may have been surprised to see water flowing from an opening in the ground that was nowhere near a stream or river. That may have been an artesian spring. To help you understand why water might flow like this from underground, I'd like to explain the two basic conditions that are necessary for their formation. The first condition is that water must be contained in an aquifer. An aquifer is an underground layer of rock or sediment that has pores or holes in it, and this porous rock allows water to flow through it freely. The aquifer must be inclined so that the upper end of it is exposed to the air at the surface of the ground. Rainwater enters it through the exposed end and travels downward to the lower portions of the aquifer. The second condition is that above and below the aquifer there must be layers of non-porous rock or clay. These are called aquicludes, and they block or hinder the flow of water. Aquicludes prevent water from draining out of aquifers. So, let's go back to our artesian springs. They're usually located above ground near the lower end of inclined aquifers. Artesian springs are those places where some hole or crack extends from the ground's surface down through the aquiclude and into the aquifer. Now, the rainwater that had drained into the aquifer from its exposed upper end creates a buildup of pressure at the lower end. So if there's a crack in the rock, a crack that runs from the aquifer to the surface, then the pressure pushes the water up through it, and water comes trickling out of the artesian spring.
Number 47. What is the talk mainly about? Number 48. Why are aquicludes important to the development of an artesian spring? Number 49. According to the professor, how does water in an aquifer reach the ground surface? Number 50. What does the professor say about pressure? This is the end of Section 1, Listening Comprehension. Stop work on Section 1. This is a reminder. At the end of the test, the supervisor will collect all of the test books. You may not leave until all of the test books have been collected. End of recording.